Feminists say that their ideology is all about equality of the sexes, but the movement's real-world activism doesn't support that. HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. I've been watching feminist activists claw and tear at due process rights for 30 years. That fight has been gendered. They've worked very hard to limit the damage they've done to only instances where men face accusations of intimate partner or sexual violence against women. I've listened to them support these attacks by demonizing men as violent sexual predators. I've watched feminist researchers use deliberate bias in their work to manufacture statistics to support that demonization. I've watched them lobby into place changes in law and policy that force men accused of intimate partner and sexual violence to fight a guilty until proven innocent standard, then limit what exculpatory evidence they can present, and protect accusers against repercussions should they be caught using lies to try to obtain a conviction. It cannot be rationally argued that lobbying for laws to impose accountability on one sex while exempting the other from accountability is an effort to achieve equality of the sexes. It can't even be argued that it's about fairness, because the changes feminists fought for are designed to increase convictions of accused men regardless of actual guilt, while protecting female accusers regardless of whether their accusations are valid or criminally false. They advocated for the legal imposition of a double standard. It is by definition an attack on fairness and equality, in which they've demanded men's civil rights be infringed for women's purported benefit. But as reprehensible as that is, its implications are even worse. The civil right of due process isn't just about fairness. Fairness is important in a court of law, and it's part of what legal due process standards are created to uphold, but the civil right itself is actually a protection against government abuse of the otherwise powerless individual citizen. If an authoritarian ideology wanted to completely take over, dominate, and control the United States of America, civil rights protecting citizen dissidents against government retaliation create a solid, insurmountable barrier against their efforts. The most obvious is freedom of political speech, another civil right we've seen feminists attack. An authoritarian government cannot allow that freedom because it allows the citizen to challenge the actions and authority of governing bodies. This is why nations with totalitarian theocracies or dictatorships are so heavily censored. Censorship isn't the only way totalitarian governments smash dissidents, however. Another means is wrongful criminal conviction and imprisonment. Without things like the innocent until proven guilty standard, the right to present evidence in your own defense, the right to confront your accuser in a court of law, the right to legal representation and legal recourse if one's accuser lies in court, the dissident citizen would be vulnerable to punishment or at least silencing via false imprisonment based on trumped-up charges. Feminists are breaking down that protection against government abuse of power, one detail at a time, using society's protective attitude toward women as the wedge to destabilize the civil rights structure. That isn't going to work out the way they present it, as a protection for women. Eventually, somewhere in the country, the fact that our society has condoned infringement of those rights in cases where men are accused of intimate partner and sexual violence will be used as an argument in court supporting infringements of those same rights in other cases. And if there's case law upholding those infringements, they'll be extended to whatever criminal allegation the prosecutor is attempting to prove. Imagine being told that you cannot present your purchase receipt for a disputed item as evidence against a theft charge because you're just trying to use it to shame and humiliate the store owner. But are feminists aware of the groundwork they're laying? I think the academic and political leadership probably knows, but the grassroots has no idea. They are trapped within the victim identity cult formed by the leaders and dogma creators within their movement, and they're going to view everything through that filter. One I explained in a recent blog post on how social justice NPCs are created. It started with feminists gendering the concept of oppression, deeming women a victim sex whose advantages don't count and whose adverse experiences are always the result of prejudice and discrimination. They've deemed men the perpetrator sex whose advantages are always the result of prejudice and discrimination and whose adverse experiences never are. They portray physically surviving one's own emotional fragility as a sign of feminine strength, and they push for men to be identified as always having power over women. That female frame makes the victim identity a female power identity, prompting the victim's female grassroots to adopt it. The male frame's more blatant power identity creates a guilt trip and then provides male feminists with two escape clauses from it. They're either bad power, or perp in need of feminism's control, or good power, the protector identity. When these identities are adopted wholesale, the identitarian will see any evidence against them as a threat of self-erasure. Within their respective identities, feminism's grassroots are now primed to object to any failure to favor any woman's interests any time they're in conflict with those of a man. Suddenly, failure to discriminate is now discrimination, at least if the person facing discrimination is male and it's for the benefit of a female. You now have a politically active portion of one sex willing to accept blatant harmful violation of their human rights and personal freedoms for the perceived benefit of the other, which is willing to demand those violations out of a sense of disenfranchisement-based entitlement, in other words, as a form of reparations. When a female student makes an accusation of sexual misconduct, she's not just seeking justice. She is presenting her identity for validation by the staff responsible for handling her complaint. To put it more bluntly, she's there to get her victim card stamped. That's not to say that she's not a victim, but that regardless of whether she is or not, that validation is expected. This is why we are seeing college co-eds accusing Betsy DeVos of supporting rapists and throwing victims under the bus. Not because there's any evidence the changes she has proposed will lead to the violent sexual chaos on university campuses they are predicting, but because it's not important to them whether the incidents of alleged misconduct are real or not. They are unable to recognize the difference, and they are unable to recognize the rights infringements the existing policy has caused against male students by supporting fake cases with fake standards. The perpetrator sex doesn't have rights. The victim sex has rights. The perpetrator sex has obligations, and one of those obligations is for one of its number to become the scapegoat any time a member of the victim sex needs one. I expect glorious tantrums from university feminists and their academic and political leaders if any of the proposed changes become official. What will be really interesting, though, will be to see further down the line as the dire predictions don't come true. Perhaps this experience could affect some students differently. Cognitive dissonance can shatter biases like they're made of glass. Maybe it'll lead to the next generation's Janice Fiamingo or Christina Hoff Sommers, or even another with the political X-ray vision of Alison. I'm not going to hold my breath, but one can always hope.